Beja. I'll be the one introducing you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Leilani and I'm a media studies major. Hi, I'm Hella. I'm a psychology major. Hi, I'm Ana Sophia. My major is elementary ed.
Hey, I'm Andrew and I'm majoring in computer science.
I'm Hayden. I'm a history secondary ed and poli sci major.
Wow.
I'm Katie. I'm a graduate assistant. So I've actually heard you talk like in the beginning of the year when you had like the training.
Hopefully this isn't too redundant for you.
Oh, I'm sure. Introduce you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Joining us today is Dr. Jalil Bassett Cameron, who serves as the Senior Equity and Inclusion Officer / Title IX Coordinator for the Office of Equity and Inclusion here at CCSU. He is responsible for managing complaints, investigations, and reporting on sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, sexual assault, and discrimination cases. Prior to her joining the CCSU committee, she served as the Assistant Dean of Student Affairs at numerous universities, as well as the Department of Higher Education. She was also responsible for supervising the university's community assessment response and evaluation team. She has been in higher education for over 18 years and has also worked as the Assistant Dean of Student Affairs and Retention at Franklin Pierce University, University of Bridgeport, and the Department of Higher Education, as well as our sister school, NCS.
Wow.
He has certifications in LGBTQ plus safe zone training, sexual assault, crisis counseling, and Title IX hearing officer. He has been published with the Association of Title IX Administrators regarding a research on vicarious trauma and has presented at numerous conferences. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you.
for joining.
Makes me sound so fancy. So I put a PowerPoint presentation together today that is kind of the marriage of Title IX and discrimination through the Office of Equity and Inclusion. So it's my hope that this can kind of spiral some conversations, and it's not inclusive of everything that the office does, but I think it'll kind of give you a good guide point for students, faculty, and staff to understand what the office does. So our office at other institutions is referred to as the diversity office, sometimes the multicultural office, and sometimes legal affairs. Here at CCSU, we're the Office of Equity and Inclusion. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk to you about what our office specifically does and give you kind of a PowerPoint overview of this conversation. So I do want to, every training that I do with faculty, staff, and students, it's important to say you're going to have a trigger, but also an activation warning. And the differences are, sometimes I might say something to you that doesn't really resonate with you right now or upset you, and that's totally fine, but it might activate something later down the line. And that's when you should reach out to me and say, some of the information you went over didn't really bother me in the moment because you warned me, but now I'm having a hard time dealing with something. And that's totally possible because what we're talking about is very sensitive information. I want to go over what OEI does, the offices that we oversee, make sure that faculty, staff, and students understand discrimination, Title IX, mandated reporting and how to report, and then some resources. So that's kind of what we're going to do today in a quick time together. So in short, these are some of the bullets. OEI, in short, is important to keep in mind the diversity, equity, and inclusion of the university. So we try to plan cultural events, but instead of us actually planning the events, we encourage the offices doing the programming, like your department here or others. We don't want to be the ones doing all the work. We're the ones that's promoting the work that's being done by the experts. We do manage all the compliance. So that includes non-discrimination education, Title IX, sexual misconduct, ADA and FHA, and equal opportunity. For those that don't know, every time that a faculty or staff member is hired, it has to go through a clearance process to make sure that when you get a degree, no one is discriminating against you because of who you are. And that's what the university is in compliance with. All of that goes through our office. Yes,
So when you say that you provide leadership and you don't do the work.
Yeah.
And you organize that out to the organization, do those organizations include clubs or is it more faculty?
it's more faculty and staff, but if there is a club that comes to our office and says, can you put up this poster? Can you attend? Can you come? Then we would do that.
Got it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Question.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with like how they tried canceling a movie on campus.
yes.
So that goes through your office.
So the concern came through our office and we met with as many students as possible. We can talk about that a little bit if that's helpful to this group. So being a public institution, we have no right to say, you can't speak or you can't speak, even if I don't agree with what you're going to say. As long as that message is not a hate crime or any violence against someone, you have the right to speak, right? So what the university needs to do is make sure that the pendulum is equal on both sides. So if you want to speak something, that we give the right to the other side to also be there and support both sides. We have to put in our office, we have to essentially be neutral to all parties so that anyone can feel welcome. And especially the Title IX coordinator, I have to serve students who feel that they've been taken advantage of, as well as students who have been accused, because I serve all students, faculty, and staff. And so for that particular movie screening, the vice president and my colleague Lindsay went and supported the LGBTQ community while they were doing their event. And I attended the movie so that I can see if there was any Title IX violations. So that's, we kind of divide and conquer.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. On the next slide, we're talking about the offices that are overseen by our department. So the Women's Center, I'm sure you're familiar because it's in this the Student Center. OVA in Shore, Office of Victim Advocacy, and then LGBTQ, which is in Burroughs Hall. So each three of those offices serve a certain population that is underrepresented. So the Women's Center serving mostly women and in women's initiatives. The LGBTQ is obviously serving that population, but also allies. And then OVA is for victims and survivors. Again, if a student is interested in learning about one of them, they don't have to identify. So is it possible that a male is like, I really wanted to learn more about women's rights? Then you're more than welcome to it. But those are the populations that are kind of like highlighted under OEI. Okay. So the first part of why somebody might come to our office is for discrimination. Excuse me. When you go to the reporting form, which is available on our website, I tried to screenshot it. It didn't come out so great, but if you go under reporting, there's 3 different ways that you can report. There's a discrimination, there's a Title IX, and a sexual misconduct. So the discrimination one is the one I'm going to talk about first. So you have to identify if you're a faculty, staff, student, or community member, or anonymous, and then what the protected class is that you feel you were discriminated against. So age, disability, marital status, origin, religion, sex, and veteran status, or other, which is the catch-all where mostly like hostile work environments would go to. And then after that, it comes to my office, excuse me, I meet with the student, faculty, or staff, and we talk about it. We talk about what they're looking for, we talk about their experience, and we decide if we're going to do an investigation. Sometimes a student, faculty, or staff might have feelings of discrimination, but not actuality. So I feel like I was discriminated against, but I don't actually have any evidence, or no one actually said anything to me. So that's what we kind of piecemeal in the first intake meeting. It's important to understand retaliation. So it's against the law to retaliate against somebody because they filed a complaint against Title IX or a protective class. So that's just kind of like some language that I borrowed from the CSU system, because we all go through a required training. And so they give us these slides that I thought might be helpful for your PowerPoint. The next one goes into some more details of how it's illegal to discriminate, specifically for employment. And so I'll meet with faculty and staff in the beginning of their journey regarding these kinds of concerns. And then the next slide talks a little bit more about differential treatment. So those are kind of the more significant ones that I've seen when it comes to discrimination. Any questions about those? Excuse me. Hostile work environment is hard to explain unless you've been in it, then you know exactly what it is. So it's this unwelcome kind of environment. It's could be connected to someone's protective class. It's definitely interfering with a person's work, and then it has to be severe, pervasive, or persistent according to the new laws. And one incident can be so severe. That's what the investigation would value, right? Like what might be severe to me might be very different to you. And so that subjectivity comes out in the investigation. Now I want to talk a little bit about Title IX for those of you that don't know. 1972, so we're talking about a law. This is 50 years old, not that far off. This is all about equality based on the sex and not gender. So can anyone tell me how we define sex versus gender?
Sex is biological, so what you're born as.
Correct.
And gender is what you like identify as and feel that you truly are.
Perfect, yes. So the law right now, we're not entertaining the gender. It's all about sex, the actual biology. And you have to be excluded from or denied the benefits or subject to some kind of educational program, and because of that, discrimination. And then I just thought it might be important to kind of go over quickly the things that are included in Title IX. So a stalking case, retaliation, harassment, discrimination, dating violence, domestic violence, and any kind of sexual misconduct all fall under Title IX. So if a student, faculty, or staff says something happened to them regarding sexual violence, whether it happened before they were at Central or during their time, my job as a Title IX coordinator is to make sure that they're successful, whether that means obtaining a degree, whether that means going to work, whether that means being successful, as a staff member. And so sometimes along those journey, you might have to do things. So for example, students have to do a yearly Title IX education through online. And let's say that you were a victim of an assault or something related. You can email me and say, Jill, I'm really triggered by this. Can you excuse me? And I would excuse you, right? And I do that for faculty and staff as well. So the protection of Title IX shouldn't really be something that faculty, staff, or students frown upon. It's really the checks and balances to make sure that the university and no one does anything to prevent you from graduating. And believe it or not, there's lots of documentaries out there that show universities encouraging a student who might be perceived as needy to go to another school because they just want to get rid of, quote, the problem. And that's against the law, right? The problem is not supporting students, and that's what universities have to do by this law. And then the next one is just going over every faculty and staff is a state employee, so they're obligated to report neglect of a student, a child that's under the age of 18, as well as their mandatory reporters for any Title IX infraction. So if a coach, for example, hears from their athlete, an athlete goes to them and confides in them, it's really important that the coach kind of stop them before they disclose and say, I want to support you, but I do need to let you know I am not confidential. The only people at the university that are confidential are university counselors through the therapy office, health and wellness, and clergy. Other than that, everyone is a mandated reporter. So it's important that students know that before they just kind of spill all their information and then realize that has to be reported to me. So I train RAs, OLs, all of those people who might get those disclosures more often and are perceived as confidential. I train them to say, listen, I'm not confidential, but this is what I can do for you. That way, no one can say, I didn't know when I just shared with them all my business. And now I'm kind of like, all these people know. So those are the required guidelines for state employees. Reporting Title IX is a little different than discrimination because, again, it's mandatory for faculty and staff. Where discrimination, you can report on somebody else being discriminated about, but that doesn't initiate an investigation. Because discrimination is a protective class. So I'm all much older than you all. If somebody were to come in here and to say something derogatory to me about my age, you all might feel like that was discriminatory, but it's for me to decide. So you can observe, like that would be a hostile environment, right? The observation could be uncomfortable for you, but the actual discrimination has to happen to the victim. With Title IX, you can observe a Title IX violation and you can become the complainant. So for example, if I am sexually assaulted or, a partner comes in and starts beating me up, you are now also a victim because you've seen that experience. Okay. So that's why I go over how to report things, give them some of the basic stuff, calling 911 if it's an emergency, and then the health and the wellness of the victim is the most important thing. I went over some definitions if anyone doesn't know what these are. Sexual harassment, can anyone give me an example of what you perceive is most prevalent on a college campus and not necessarily central, but just college environments for sexual harassment? Inappropriate jokes. Anyone else?
Inappropriate flirting.
Inappropriate flirting, yep. And what do you think is like my arch nemesis of like the medium of how this is done nowadays? It's very easily harassed online. Thank you, Colin. Yeah, harassing people online is very prevalent. Wasn't a thing, 50 years ago, and now it's very hard to keep up with it, right? Because you could do third-party harassment, you could do passive-aggressive harassment, all of that through our lovely social medias.
But at least you can screenshot and have proof.
For sure, definitely.
So it'd be kind of like snitching yourself out if you're one of those people who harass people online.
Right,
There's
Yeah.
evidence and
there is.
it doesn't go away.
It does not. Wish everyone knew that. On the next slide, I went into non-consensual sexual contact. So this doesn't necessarily need to be actual penetration. This can be, any kind of object. It could be groping, fondling, that kind of thing. And then the next one is more aggressive with a rape. The one after that, I go into sexual exploitation. So this is specifically with photos and images. Can anyone think of where a case, for example, that might be pretty prevalent on college campuses, or how this kind of comes to my attention the most in my office? Blackmail, yes. You should be doing this presentation. Yeah, revenge porn is very prevalent on college campuses. So that's the idea that I am in a relationship with someone. I've shared photos with them with the intention that they have them. We then break up or have some kind of disgruntledness, and then they share them virally without my consent. The second thing that we see on college campuses is blackmail, specifically people that don't know each other. So I'm sharing photos of myself on a dating app. Next thing I know, this person is in another country altogether, and they're saying, if you don't wire me this amount of money within this amount of time, it's going to go viral. So we see all different types. Unfortunately, unless the two parties are students at the university or both faculty or both staff connected to the university in some capacity, the university doesn't have jurisdiction. I can't go to New Haven and ask someone for their cell phone for the proof that I need. The police would need to get involved. So you can imagine that these cases are very complicated if the individuals I'm working with don't have trust with the law enforcement. A lot of the work that I'm doing is to create that goodwill and explain to them the progress needs to be with the law enforcement in order for us to do anything actionable. Stalking, pretty basic definition there. Anyone have an example of how this is prevalent on college campuses?
Kind of in the name.
Yeah, can you give me an example of what you think it looks like though?
Just like literally following someone that does not want to be followed. By
Mhm.
you. Like
Where do you think the following occurs the most on college campus?
dorms? I'm
Dorm?
not sure.
Yep, that's a good guess. Anyone else?
social media.
Okay. Yeah, the GPS is definitely an issue. So I go over with training, I go to the settings feature. I don't know if anyone has their phone now, but I go over the settings. You go to like your favorite social media app, for example. Excuse me. So let's go to like, I don't know, Instagram. That's pretty basic. And you go to the top of Instagram and it says location, and you click on location. See that precise location feature? Every time that there's upgrades, that's automatically highlighted. And so some students, faculty and staff don't know that they have to update that every time that there's an upgrade. That is a perfect way that people know exactly where your location is if you didn't intend them to. Additionally to stalking socially, it's also not residence halls because some people are restricted, but commuter and residential students stalk often in dining halls. And the dining halls is really hard to prove that you're there stalking versus you're just there to eat. It's a coincidence that you happen to be there. It's a coincidence that you happen to be at the gym at the same time. And that's where the investigation is really important for us to show you don't need to be in the same space at the same time. And that's where schedules can come into convenience. But again, a student might feel like you're stalking them, but you actually might have the same schedule. But if you have a history with that person, then it becomes more than a coincidence, right? So that's all the fun stuff that I do with my job. I do say that it's fun because I think that with all of my cases, I'm helping someone, and that's the goal, right? Whether I'm helping a respondent who's been accused of something, or I'm helping a student who's been experiencing this, I do feel like I'm helping the community to be a stronger. Intimate partner violence, domestic violence, dating violence, all of that goes under this threshold. We talked about protective orders and restraining orders and no contact orders through the university. I know I'm going pretty fast, but I feel like a lot of these terms you probably already know, and just kind of talking about the experience helps. And again, retaliation is the idea that I have now put a claim out there, whether it's discriminatory or Title IX related, and then you have a behavior because of that. So I'll give you some examples. A coach no longer plays their all-star playmate there because they put a complaint against them, right? A professor get a complaint against you, and now all of a sudden you start failing all of your tests, right? Like it's behavior that is specific because you did something against them, filing a complaint. Now you're being treated differently. We talk about consent in my workshop, so I thought it might be helpful to mention here. This generation does not understand that consent has to be an active yes in every single step. I did a couple trainings with students before they became students here, so they were onboarding as freshmen. And one of the students in high school said, "Do I actually need to get in writing that she gave me consent?" And I said, "It's not a bad idea." And they all laughed. And I said, the reality is, if you're going to have a hookup culture where I hook up with a different person on Monday, I hook up with somebody on Tuesday, I hook up on Wednesday, I'm not here to judge that behavior. Like, I love love. If you have love every night, then that's great. But if you don't have a relationship established, so there's not text messages, there's not emails, there's no correspondence to show that the both of you are signing up for this, then there can be things lost in translation, especially if you have not established, are you okay with having sex? If you can't say the words, you shouldn't be doing the adult behaviors. And that's what a lot of my conversations with younger students are. What I'm realizing in the college environment is when we start getting alcohol involved. There is such a thing as regret sleeping together, and that's not Title IX violation, right? Regretting having sex does not mean you didn't consent. But in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how you can't give consent if you're under the influence. And more importantly, there's 4 populations that cannot give a consent. And so as someone, you cannot ask for consent. Who are those 4 populations? Do you think of them?
Gonna go on.
What's that?
Disabled.
Disabled, thank you, yeah.
Minors.
Minors, that's 2.
If you're under
Under the influence of drugs, alcohol, sleep, anything under the influence. And then the 4th. It is. You guys are awesome. Do you know that sometimes we spend like long time digging that out with populations? Yeah, so it's minors and it's elderly. And again, it's about the mental capability, right? And so some students laugh when I say about the elders. I'm not saying that your 80-year-old grandmother, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is people in retirement homes have had cases where they've been taken advantage of and sexually assaulted, right? So we're talking about people who do not have the ability to make decisions for themselves, young or old, or under the influence, and others, that consent cannot be given, and therefore you cannot ask for consent. So I think it's helpful when I talk to students like, can a drunk person sexually assault another drunk person? And the answer is yes, because if you're intoxicated, you cannot give consent and you cannot get consent, right? So right there off the bat, you should not be hooking up unless, again, it's in a committed relationship where you have said, we're both going to have drinks tonight. Are we okay with that? We've all agreed to it, you know, like, and some people are like, can you give me an example? I'm like, sure. People at their weddings get drunk and they're getting married and they say, we're going to have sex tonight. That could be all kosher, right? But we're talking about these instances where communication isn't there, consent is not there, and then alcohol ties into the muddiness. These are some on-campus resources that we typically give to students, faculty, and staff. And again, the only ones that have confidentiality are the Student Wellness Center. And then the next slide is off-campus resources. So that's pretty much my presentation where I tie in discrimination and Title IX so that everyone feels like they understand what the standards are at the university. I see you have some questions here and I'm hoping that I already answered all of them, but is there anything I didn't go over that you'd want me to highlight a little bit more?
what's the time frame of the investigation? I know it differs upon case by
Yeah.
case, but what's the typical time frame?
No, that's a great question. So for Title IX, I have 90 days to complete the case. So investigation could be 80 of those days, right? Like it doesn't, investigation, I'm not restricted to how long the investigation is, it's the whole case. For discrimination cases, there is no real obligation. We tend to turn over the cases pretty quick. Because sometimes investigation is not what the faculty, staff, or student wants. Sometimes they just want an apology, or sometimes they just want more understanding of why the protocols or procedures happened. A lot of it too can be talked out through mediation or an informal resolution so that it doesn't all go through investigation. Anything else that I didn't go over?
Could someone make the same complaint twice?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Mhm.
How about the same person?
It can. I mean, we would, if it's the same exact incident, then I would reopen the first case. But sometimes what I get is, Jill, I told you that I got fondled and I didn't want to do anything, but now that I've been in therapy, I'm really ready to talk to you about what actually happened. In addition to being fondled, I was also sexually assaulted. And so that would be a different case, right? Because now I have more information.
Yeah.
I should also share with you that when a complainant comes forward and says, I was violated in some capacity, I do the intake and the student has the right to say whether they want us to do something, the university. And there's an informal resolution or there's an investigation, which results in a hearing. And sometimes the students say, no, I just want you to know about it, right? I just want you to know I was sexually assaulted. I'm not ready to tell you by who. They are a student here, but I'm not ready. Well, okay, fine. So then let's say another week goes by and they say, I'm ready to tell you their name, but I'm not ready to do anything yet. Okay, so now I have a name, but I still don't have your permission to do anything. So me going forward wouldn't really help because what I really need is your testimony. The only time that I would go forward without the consent of the complainant is if I already have cases with that person's name attached to it. The only other time, another example, would be if there's a pattern of behavior, right? And so I don't necessarily need one person's testimony because I've got numerous others and now it's like a whole case against this one person. The other time is when there's strong evidence, meaning it's already on camera. Or let's say for domestic violence, for example, let's say me and my partner, they beat me up pretty regularly. And now the last time that they beat me up was in front of all of you. The university would not be able to ignore that. Even if I was like, but I love them, I want to stay with them. The university would have to say, we understand, Jill, but the abuse has happened in public now. We cannot do what you want. And domestic violence is the one case where a lot of the complainants do not want us to go forward because they want to hold on to that relationship. And there's a whole power of abuse cycle that happens. And so we do try to get as many people with counseling as possible. It's not a good feeling for me to go forward with the complainant not wanting me to, but there are some times where I have to. It's all very layered, right? Like it's not just one way. These cases can be very complicated. Other questions?
Yeah, hi. I wanted to ask a question, which is, we've been talking a lot about complainants coming forward, right?
Mhm.
But what happens when there are lots of rumors floating around or rumors on social media, but there hasn't been any formal complaint?
Sure. So we've had that recently. If the university is aware of numerous complaints, but without a complaint, we'll do an investigation to see if there is anything there. And we typically would do an outside investigator so that it's really neutral. Because it's possible that because I'm involved with the students already, that there could be bias, because we don't know who the victims are. Where in other cases, the complainants typically come to me directly, and so then I would work with them. And so when we're doing based on Rumorville, it takes longer, right? And typically, historically at other universities, nothing typically shows of it. The key would be to find a victim based on those rumors.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you also have to be careful. I hate that language of a witch hunt, because I acknowledge that, women have died of being called witches, so I don't really like that word, but we have to be careful that because there's a respondent that people don't like, or, that in society there are political people that run and we don't like them, we can't just investigate to try to find something to hold them accountable for, right? And so you have to have faith in the process, and that means holding responsibles as equitable as complainants. So everyone deserves the same rights. Other questions or things that you're curious about?
I feel like this is more of a personal question.
Sure.
But because like I'm also going into like the counseling field, so is it difficult having to put like your personal beliefs like aside and work with people that have like very opposing? views?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I meet with students, vaccine staff every day that I don't like as a person, but I'm not, that's not what I was hired to do. At this school, at other schools or other jobs that I've had, that was my role, right? Was to be the judge, but that's not what a Title IX coordinator is. And it's really, really important to have Title IX coordinators, because I have seen where cases have gone really bad for both sides, and it's not right. It doesn't do anyone any good when you let your personal bias in. And there's definitely been times where I've been called names or someone has done something to me, and in the past, I've had like my car slashed, I've been punched, I've been, like, it's not an easy job to be in higher ed and in this kind of role. But I think you have to know your implicit bias, right? Like, I know what my triggers are. I know if somebody comes in my office and, personally attacks my family, I'm like, I'm out. Somebody else has to take over, and I hand it over. You have to know your limits. And that takes with age and wisdom. And I'm sure in another 20 years, I'll be even better than I am today, right? But you have to have a calling to be able to couch it. And that's why I did my research on vicarious trauma, because the reality is, whether you're realizing what you're hearing as a counselor, an advocate, a mentor, even people that come into your space here, they probably are being very vulnerable with you and telling you what could be their worst day of their life. And you take a part of that home with you with that vicarious trauma. And so it's really important that you rejuvenate yourself so that you could be your best person going forward. So it's all kind of tied into what I do. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I know Colin went over it a little bit in the intro, but in case someone wanted to become a Title IX coordinator, could you explain that process?
Yeah, I don't know that there is a process. I know that my undergrad is in English. I wanted to be an English teacher for a while, and then I took a teaching class, and there was a lot of things that I wasn't ready to do and didn't want. I was like, curriculum, I don't want to do that. I want it to be different every day. And they're like, that's not how teaching is. I was like, all right, I'm out of here. And then I got my master's is in women's studies and gender understanding. And that I thought I was going to run a women's center. And then I realized that they get a budget, and, sometimes they have restrictions. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to impact change. And so then I got my master's in higher education, and that's when I took a lot of classes in the law. And that's when I said, this is what I want to do, right? Like, I want to be outward facing and helping faculty, staff, and students. I want to be able to do a little bit of programming, but really support the programming initiatives. But I really want to do is make sure that our community is as safe as possible. So I think that to be a Title IX coordinator, you have to have a higher background, law and or an EDD is recommended. So lots of schooling to make sure you know of everything, just for you to get the job, to know that every case is so different, right? So like the cases I'm dealing with now will become case studies for the next people. And sometimes I get a case and I'm like, I don't even know what to do with this one because there's nothing in the law books about it. And you call up your friends at other schools and you're like, oh, that's a good one. Well, I've got one for you. And you do a lot of sharing and talking and trust. And you learn from each other every time. And then what's interesting about my job is that it changes. Title IX regulations changes with who's in the White House. So right now we're under Biden's guidance, or going to be under Biden's guidance. And the next thing you know, it'll get changed again. So I have to stay on top of it. And that's what I kind of like, is that it changes all the time. Yeah.
I just have another question.
Okay.
Because you were saying that sometimes you don't know what to do. So in that scenario, do you like just give the case more time
Mhm.
or? Cause you're the only Title IX coordinator in the school, so what would the process be if you're kind of stuck?
Well, I don't typically get stuck. It's more of initially, oh, this is a new one, so I have to do some more research and I have to call up the other CSU schools and say, it's our turn. What do we got here? Like I have a case where there's 4 complainants against the same respondent, but only 3 of them want to participate. So was kind of torn between, do I go forward with the 4th one or do I just go forward with the 3? Right? That isn't really being stuck. It's a matter of preference. And so those small nuances, that's why it's helpful to have, we have a council here at the university, so I would call them up. We have a council for the CSU system, and we have Title IX directors at the other CSU schools. So we kind of work as a cohort, and say, hey, I've got this case. What would you all do? And there really is no right or wrong as long as you're obeying the law, right? And so there might be some word choices different between the previous Title IX coordinator. Their letters might have been more flowery than mine, but mine are very kind of like legal. That's not doing anything wrong. It's just a matter of preference, right? And so a lot of it is just learning your own craft and being able to know that every case means someone got hurt. Whether it's that someone's guilty or not, that's not relevant. Someone's hurt, discrimination or Title IX. So there's a lack of understanding, there's a lack of education, something happened. And so my job is to kind of figure out what happened. Yeah. Was it helpful? Was there anything that you learned new? What's something that you would want to make sure I say again to the next presentation?
As a person going into education, the mandatory, what was it? The
Mandatory reporting?
thank you, mandatory reporting seemed important for, and I'm sure I'm gonna learn about it in ed classes and stuff, but. And you said that it was people under the age of 18. So like I'm 22, they can't mandatorily report me
Unless it's a Title IX disclosure.
unless it's a timeline.
Yep.
Just because CCSU is like has a lot of ed students, so I thought maybe really applying more emphasis on that mandatory reporting would be useful.
And one of the things that's coming through the pipeline as you are, because is anyone here a senior? You are, okay. So maybe not before you leave, but the next year will be, all the buzz is domestic violence is now a protective class. So if you are a faculty, staff, or student and you're in a domestic violence case, and you disclose to your faculty member, I can't come to class today, I got beaten up by my partner last night, that, excuse me, that absence in your class can't be held against you because you're a protective class. But again, you get labeled as in a domestic violence situation, which then, what would the faculty have to do? Report it to me for the Title IX, and then I reach out to the student saying, it's been reported to me that you're in a domestic violence situation. I would like to give you my resources and discuss with you if you want an investigation. So some students are gonna be like, no, I didn't want to do that. I just wanted my faculty member to excuse me. Okay, well, it doesn't work that way, right? Like it's not made there to be a get out of jail card. It's meant to, there are some faculty and staff people who have to leave work because they have to go to therapy, or they can't come into work because they have a black eye and they don't want everybody to know. Well, anytime that those disclosures come forward now, they're protected. So you can imagine if you're an employee and you're in a domestic violence situation and your employer says to you, your evaluation is coming up and your attendance is really poor and you might lose your job. Now you've got to worry about losing your job on top of the abuse that's happening at home, on top of maybe you have children. So if you say to your employer, listen, I didn't want to have to do this before, but I am in a protected class, I'm in an abusive relationship, I really don't want it to be held against me, that faculty member would then report it to Title IX, and then together with HR, I would support that staff member, right? So there are pros and cons to the law, but domestic violence is added as a protective class effective next year.
Could you explain what you mean by protected class?
Sure. So if you go back to that, I don't know if you still have the PowerPoint, but there are a couple of different populations that are protected under the law. And so discrimination, if it were to occur against that protection because of that protection, That's against the law
in that class.
in that class.
Okay.
Exactly. Yep.
And everybody, just so that you understand, all faculty at CCSU are required to report any incidents of violence against a student that they become aware of. So if one of you says to me, and that's already has been that way for years, you know, something happened, I'm required to report it. And not just because I'm director of the center, but because I'm a faculty member on campus. I don't have a choice to keep it to myself. I have to report, and that's the same for all of your professors.
So like marital statuses, for example. So if, let's say you're all in an organization and whoever is leading the organization comes in and says, I need a volunteer for Sunday for the open house. And everyone's like, I have obligations. And they're like, well, Jill, you can do it, right? Because you're not married. Everybody else has a couple that they're gonna go and see. So Jill will do the open house and everybody else is off. That would be really messed up, like to purposely punish or highlight that you are now doing something because you're not married, or because you are married, or because of who you are, or the color of your skin, or the assumed nationality, or anything where you are treated differently because of one of those things on the list. It is discrimination. And so the goal would be for us to decipher, is this habitual, or is this the person is so ignorant? I'll give you an example and you can tell me, is this racist? A faculty member is teaching a class and the faculty member is international. And it's Martin Luther King Day is coming up, and at this school, they're off for Martin Luther King. They don't have class. And so the faculty member says, oh, and remember, we don't have class on Monday. And one of the other students who's international says, professor, why don't we have class on Monday? And the professor says, that's a good question. It's Martin Luther King Day. Jill, why don't you tell everybody who Martin Luther King was? And Jill is the only Black student in the class. So is that racist?
Question.
Yeah.
So would it be based on how, if they feel discriminated? Because
Well,
earlier you said.
Right, that's what you're shaking your head, yes. Anyone else have any theories?
It's kind of, it's, gray areas to me, because it depends now on how the question was, how it was delivered. Was there snideness in his tone? Was there this?
Yeah, but you're
reflection in-
assuming just because they're Black that they know about it. That's why I hate when people do that. Just because I'm Puerto Rican, that doesn't mean that I know all the things that I'm from Puerto Rico. I'm like, I
Right.
don't know.
What-
Right. It would be equivalent to say, oh, do you know how to make rice and beans? Or do you know, like your culture does not mean that you now represent the whole population, number one. But number two, the answer is that faculty member should have said, very something easy, right? Don't highlight Jill, just say, that's a great question why we're off. I'm actually international, so I don't know too much about Martin Luther King. Does anyone here know about Martin Luther King? If you open it up inclusively, not only does it give the platform for somebody else in that to highlight, right? Maybe you're an expert on Martin Luther King and you happen to not be a person of color. You can still speak on it, the accolades that he did, right? But it also doesn't make someone feel like they are something wrong because of who they are, right? So that's the difference between the impact and the intent. The intent was for the faculty to say, I don't know. Does somebody else know? But the impact was that someone felt a certain kind of way. And if they didn't feel a certain kind of way, sure enough, somebody else in that class saw that and was like, that's a microaggression. And so it might not be racist to the student. They might not have felt it, but the situation is not in line with what equity and inclusion is.
So just like the environment that it gives off, kind of, so, because you can say, let's say in a situation where the professor or the teacher that asked the student was also Black,
Right,
that would still hold, right, because it make other people kind of uncomfortable.
right, because keep in mind, if they're international, they could be any different type of race, right? But I think what I give different examples of cases that have happened so that people understand sometimes you just need to take a minute and pause and think, because if your goal was to educate the class on who Martin Luther King Jr. was, you could do that by another voice. You don't have to highlight the one person who you think knows the knowledge because of what they look like. Right? We do that with accents. We do all different types of things can happen, and it's impact versus intent. Right? I had a student once who said to their RA, oh, I'm going to the beach. And the RA said, why do you have to go to the beach? You're already dark. Okay, well, that's not right, right? Because you go to the beach for other reasons than to get a tan, right? But again, impact versus intent. Was the intent of that RA to hurt that student or to be racist? I don't know, right? So this is why conversations, we have to give each other the grace to make mistakes. But we also have to acknowledge that some mistakes are more than mistakes, right? So that's a lot of the work that our office does.
Can I give another example?
Yes.
Okay, so let's say we're at a bar and then I go up to someone and they're Spanish and I'm like, you want a Corona? Would that be kind of like racist?
If you're only doing it because they're Spanish, then yes.
Well, what if it's because you immediately link Spanish with people who are Spanish to like liking Coronas?
Yeah, I think that's a big jump. Right.
Yeah, I'm just cheap.
Just because they're Spanish, you don't know what they like to drink. They could only drink, they could be
I
just there
think
for water.
there's a lot of things like that, like students who have accents are perceived as international. Staff members that are international are perceived as stupid. You know, like there's lots of things that happen that are microaggressions that as an institution, we want to be progressive. We want to be where students want to get their degree. We want faculty to be proud and feel comfortable. We want staff to be excited to come to work. You can't do that if where you go to work, you feel like there's somebody judging you or being mean to you, right?
I have a similar example based off the MLK example you did. I had a professor comparing something occurring in a class to American slavery, but he approached the topic by not knowing the answer and then opening it up to class. But while opening up to the class, he used his hands to direct them to the black students in the room.
Yeah.
Is that because he opened it up for everybody, but he still was doing the microaggression of doing
Right.
the hand motion, the targeting? So it's
They might not even realize that they were doing
yeah,
that,
probably
right?
not.
Right.
But-
I think that would count because gesturing is still a form of communication.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. Just
Right.
curiosity.
Yeah. And I think we as a community get stronger the more that we have those conversations of, I don't know if you meant to come off that way, but that felt really uncomfortable for me. And this is what I would have preferred you to do, right? You know, equity and inclusion means you're treating everyone as fair as possible with the tools that you have. And so it's very possible that you don't know any better. No one taught you. And so we have to do better by teaching people. And I think that's why your organization is so important, because you're getting out in the community and you're talking to people about this organization. It's really, really important, the work that you're doing here. You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, so my office is in Davidson Hall.
Do you have your
Um,
card with you?
I don't,
Oh.
because students never like cards. I don't know. I'm in Davidson, yeah. But I promise you that our website is up to date because we have to be up to date with our website for compliance. So if you ever need anything, please send faculty, staff, or students my way in Davidson Hall.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you so much.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was really
That's for
helpful.
you.
Okay,